Obama used a single Bible verse to shake the nation. Was it true conviction or cold manipulation? The evening in Phoenix, Arizona, was charged with an electricity that seemed to hum through every inch of the civic auditorium. Cameras perched like watchful hawks on the upper decks, their lens sweeping across a restless crowd. Every seat was filled, from the closest rows to the farthest balcony, where latecomers leaned forward just to catch a glimpse. This was not an ordinary gathering, nor a routine political stopover. It was a nationally televised town hall that promised more than rhetoric. It promised confrontation. People at home had tuned in with popcorn and anticipation, aware that this night would etch itself into the country's political memory. On stage, two figures embodied two very different Americas. Donald Trump, the sitting president, perched on his chair with an energy that was hard to contain. His posture was aggressive, shoulders taut, chin tilted upward just enough to project defiance. His hands clutched the microphone as though it were both weapon and shield. Opposite him sat Barack Obama, former president, composed almost to the point of stillness. His shoulders were loose, his fingers resting lightly on his knee. There was no visible tension in him, no restless twitch, no tightening jaw. It was as if he had arrived not for a duel, but for a dialogue he had already rehearsed in his mind. The hall itself mirrored the nation's fracture. A sea of red caps and slogan-stamped shirts swayed on one side, their owners leaning forward, ready to jeer or cheer. Across the aisle, quieter yet equally determined, were those who had come to see Obama. Some clutched folded programs, some whispered among themselves, but all had that particular look of expectation in their eyes, the kind that waits for a moment of clarity amidst chaos. Reporters were everywhere, their laptops glowing, fingers poised over keys, waiting for the quote that would dominate headlines by midnight. The moderator, a local journalist, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Gentlemen, the nation is watching," he said, turning to Trump first. "Tonight we are here to discuss values, the moral compass that guides leadership. What do you have to say to the man sitting across from you?" Trump wasted no time. His voice cut through the murmur like a blade. "I'll tell you this," he said, pointing toward Obama with the kind of emphasis that makes a gesture louder than words. "People talk about his so-called legacy, his supposed values. But let's get real here. You can't lead a country if your foundation is shaky. And his has always been questionable." The reaction was instantaneous. Applause and shouts clashed with sharp gasps and indignant cries. Some stood and cheered with fists raised high. Others stiffened in their seats, jaws tightening. The hall wasn't just divided, it was combustible. Trump thrived in that kind of turbulence. His tone sharpened further, almost like a prosecutor dissecting a case before a restless jury. Obama did not flinch. He neither raised his brow nor shifted in his seat. Instead, he breathed out slowly, his gaze fixed not on Trump, but on the very crowd that had erupted. It wasn't detachment, it was calculation. Those who had observed him for years could tell. He was waiting, measuring the moment. The moderator, sensing the swell of tension, turned to Obama. "President Obama, would you like to respond?" he asked, voice caught between professionalism and plea. Before Obama moved, a woman from the front rows rose to her feet and shouted, "Show him who you are." Her voice was met with a wave of applause. From the other side, boos and chants of Trump's name surged back, crashing into each other like waves against stone. Finally, Obama leaned in, his fingers closing gently around the microphone. He waited, not out of hesitation, but out of intent. Silence can command more than shouting ever will, and he knew it. The noise gradually ebbed, leaving a strange kind of expectant quiet. Across living rooms in Nevada, diners in Oklahoma, and small-town bars in Texas, people leaned closer to their screens. When he spoke, it was almost in a conversational tone. "We're here tonight because, in our own ways, we care about this country," he began. "And when people care deeply about something, they will see it differently. They'll fight about it. But leadership isn't about who can yell the loudest. It's about who can live with their choices when the shouting ends." The words hung there, weighted yet calm, drawing the room in like a tide pulling back the shore. Trump's grin faltered, and the moderator shifted uneasily, sensing a shift in air pressure that wasn't physical but palpable. Trump didn't let it rest. He leaned forward, eyes glinting, voice rising again. "Sounds nice," he said with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Real nice. But people have questions. Barack. Real questions. About your morals. About what you really stand for. I've seen it. I've heard it. Christian values. American values. They're not in you. The hall detonated again. Cheers. Boos. Claps. Jeers. A man in a baseball cap punched the air triumphantly as if the verdict were already in. Across the aisle, a woman shouted, "He's more Christian than you." Trump's lips curled. Not quite a smile. Not quite a sneer. "That's the problem," he said. "People are fooled by his words. Fooled by the act. But I'm not fooled, and neither should this country be." The moderator tried to regain control, raising a hand. But Trump plowed on, his voice riding the chaos. "Let me ask you this, Barack. What morals were you following when you weakened our borders? When you turned your back on the working people for 8 long years? When you pushed policies that left churches struggling? Tell me that." The barrage was relentless. The crowd responded in waves. First cheers, then boos, then a muddled roar of both. It was a storm of sound, and in that storm, Trump thrived. And yet, Obama remained still, his composure almost unnerving. His hands rested loosely, his shoulders unbowed. It wasn't indifference. It was a refusal to be baited. The contrast between the two men was now the true spectacle. One blazing like a match head, the other steady like stone. The moderator turned to Obama again, this time with something close to pleading in his eyes. "President Obama, the floor is yours." The room hushed, not entirely, but enough. Obama took the microphone, glanced briefly downward as though aligning his thoughts, then lifted his gaze toward the crowd. "First," he said, "I want to thank the people of Phoenix for being here. Democracy only works when people show up." Warm applause followed, not wild but sincere. He allowed it to settle, then continued. "The president raised a question about values. A fair question, and I'll answer it." Trump drummed his fingers on the armrest, his expression a mixture of challenge and expectation. "I've never stood here claiming to be flawless," Obama said. "None of us are. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about what you fall back on when no one is watching. It's about the values that guide your choices when the cameras are off, and there's no applause waiting." The hall listened, a strange quiet forming between the bursts of noise. "For me," he continued, "those values came from my family, my mother, who taught me compassion, my grandparents in Hawaii, who worked hard without asking for recognition, and yes, from Scripture. Because whether you come from a church, a mosque, a temple, or from no faith at all, there are truths that speak to something common in all of us." The words didn't come fast. They came steady, deliberate, each one landing with a weight that was hard to deflect. Even those who bristled at his presence could not deny the sincerity lacing his tone. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the slight smile at the edge of his lips, not triumphant, not mocking, but sure. And then, at the moment when the hall was most still, Obama reached for a verse. He didn't shout it. He didn't wield it like a hammer. He offered it plainly, as if he were reminding the room of something many had forgotten. That faith, when real, doesn't need to be loud to be strong. The verse itself, a single, unmistakable line, settled over the auditorium like a curtain falling. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The noise that had filled the hall so easily before now seemed far away, as though even the most fervent partisans had been caught off guard by the simplicity of it. Trump's eyes narrowed. His posture stiffened. The finger that had jabbed so freely now rested on the armrest. He had asked for a fight. What he got instead was a reminder of a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, but stands. Families watching in small towns felt the shift before the commentators would later describe it. Parents with children in their laps exchanged glances, aware their kids had just seen something more instructive than any campaign ad could offer. Truckers and roadside diners shook their heads slowly, muttering under their breath. In living rooms across the nation, the air felt briefly, strangely, still. The moderator, sensing the moment had tilted, finally exhaled a breath he had been holding. The night would go on. The questions would continue. The noise would return. But that single line, measured, rooted in Scripture, delivered without fanfare, had already rewritten the evening. Trump, ever restless, tried to interject, but the energy was no longer his to command. The crowd, for a rare and fleeting moment, had been hushed not by spectacle, but by substance. The tension inside the Phoenix Civic Auditorium felt like a storm about to break, the kind that makes even steady hands grip their programs a little tighter. Some in the audience folded their arms across their chests, brows furrowed, but their eyes never left the stage. Whether they liked it or not, they were listening. Donald Trump, leaning slightly forward, microphone in hand, snapped through the air like a whip. "Here we go. Here comes the sermon. You had 8 years to prove your so-called values, Barack, and this country saw the outcome. Don't come in here acting like some holy man now." Laughter rippled unevenly among his supporters, short, sharp bursts of mockery that cut through the warm lights. Barack Obama didn't recoil. He didn't frown or flinch. He simply inclined his head ever so slightly, an almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the jab without granting it dominance. His attention then drifted back to the sea of faces before him, as though he were speaking not to the man across from him, but to the hundreds, and by extension, millions who were watching. "You know," he said, calm yet unmistakably clear, "it's always tempting to meet an attack with anger, to answer insult with insult. But the harder thing, the meaningful thing, is to pause and ask, what story do my actions tell? What would the people who live through my decisions say about them? Because at the end of the day, real leadership isn't defined by what you proclaim in a heated debate. It's measured in the lives that were shaped long after the cameras stopped rolling." A murmur of approval swept through the room. Someone in the back shouted, "That's right." And the applause swelled, layered, rolling, rising until it swallowed up the scattered heckles that still lingered. Cameras panned across the audience. A young woman brushing a tear from the corner of her eye. An elderly man clapping with both arms raised. Faces lit by the glow of stage lights and television screens. Obama raised a hand gently, not to silence them harshly, but to bring the moment back into balance. "Now," he continued evenly, "the president here says I don't live by the Bible. Well, I've never felt the need to wave it around like a stage prop to prove I've read it. I try to live its lessons. And one of those lessons is that true strength isn't loud. It's not about shouting down the room. It's about humility, about character, about being willing to sacrifice when no one's watching." For a beat, the hall went still again. Even Trump, who had rarely let a quiet moment go unfilled, leaned back slightly, his expression twitching with the faintest sign of recalibration. The moderator seized the pause, his voice low. "President Obama, are you saying that your faith influenced the choices you made in office?" A faint smile tugged at Obama's mouth, the kind that wasn't meant to charm but to steady. "What I'm saying," he replied, "is that faith, like it is for many here, isn't a trophy you polish. It's a compass. It doesn't mean you'll never make a mistake. It means you'll try to do what's right for people, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you politically. That's what my mother believed. That's what my faith asks of me." This time the applause broke through with real force, filling the rafters, drawing in even some who had sat skeptical moments before. The sound was loud enough that Trump's grip tightened on his microphone. His jaw clenched as if bracing for the next round. He leaned forward as though ready to strike, but the moderator raised a quick hand. Obama was not yet finished. For the first time that night, the former president reclined slightly, letting the energy of the room settle like dust after a storm. His shoulders eased. His eyes, still sharp, scanned the crowd as if to remind them that he was not there to win a shouting match. He was there to draw a boundary, one that did not require volume to hold its strength. What no one yet knew was that his most powerful reply still waited unsaid. The tension had shifted, the air thick with anticipation, the crowd poised between outrage and revelation. This wasn't just a campaign stop anymore. It had become something deeper, a reckoning not of budgets and bills, but of beliefs. Trump had thrown verbal punches with the rhythm of a prizefighter, each one designed to provoke, to rattle, to dominate. But Obama had absorbed them with a stillness that unnerved even his critics. Now, as he leaned forward again, both elbows resting on his knees, microphone balanced between his hands, the crowd hushed of its own accord. Even the far edges of the hall quieted, as if pulled by the gravity of a moment everyone's sense was about to define the evening. He looked at the moderator, then at Trump, whose fingers drummed impatiently against the armrest. Finally, back to the audience. "Let me share something," he began, voice steady but low enough to force the room to lean in. When you come from little, you learn the value of listening before you speak. You learn to let people reveal themselves by how they treat others when there's nothing to gain. His words moved slowly, deliberately, as if laid brick by brick. I know there are folks here tonight who don't like me. I know some watching at home will never trust me. That's part of democracy. But I will tell you this. In all my years, I have never tried to win a fight by tearing down someone else's faith. Because at its core, faith is a bond between a person and their creator. It is not ours to weaponize. It is not ours to put on trial. Soft clapping broke out in pockets of the hall. Heads nodded quietly. Even those unconvinced by his politics felt the weight of the sentiment. Trump leaned forward suddenly, microphone snapping alive. That's easy to say, Barack, but you hurt the church plenty. Don't stand there and play innocent. Mr. President, the moderator interjected, his tone quick. Let him finish. Trump leaned back, scowling, the interruption cutting through his momentum like a blade. Obama's calmness only seemed more pronounced now. He did not rise to the bait. He looked out again, finding one of the cameras, his voice softening further, almost intimate. Before I ever thought about running for office, he said, I was a young man in Chicago, working alongside church groups in neighborhoods too many had forgotten. I met single mothers raising their children alone, men who lost their jobs of 20 years, families holding on by a thread. And you know what kept them going? It wasn't speeches. It wasn't politicians. It was their faith, their prayers, their community, their belief that decency still mattered. The crowd stilled, drawn inward by the gravity of his memory. A camera found a middle-aged woman clutching a folded pamphlet against her chest, eyes shining. Obama let the pause linger like a held breath. That's why, he continued, when someone questions my values, I don't feel the need to yell them down, because I know the path I've walked. I know the people who stood beside me. I know the words that guided me when nothing else did. For a long moment, the entire hall seemed to be listening with one heartbeat. Homes across the Midwest paused their dinners. Truck stops muted their televisions. Students in dorm rooms replayed the live stream, sharing clips with one another before the words had even faded. Obama inhaled, exhaled, lifted his gaze, not to Trump, but to the nation. There's a line I turn to often, he said, a reminder of what strength really looks like. I think tonight is the right time to share it. The moderator leaned back, his pen frozen above his notes. Trump narrowed his eyes, as though bracing for impact. The crowd straightened in its seats, the entire hall vibrating with a silence that felt alive. Phones buzzed in pockets. Are you watching this? But no one looked away. Obama raised the microphone to his lips, waited, and then, the book of Proverbs says, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the crooked are ruined by their duplicity. The words landed not with a shout, but with a thud that rippled through the hall like a dropped stone into still water. There were no cheers, no jeers, not at first. Just an uncanny stillness. The cameras captured faces caught mid-thought. A young man whispering the verse under his breath as if to test its taste. A father squeezing his child's shoulder without realizing it. Trump blinking hard as though trying to break the spell. Obama lowered the mic slightly. No gloating, no smirk. He simply let the scripture breathe on its own, filling the room with something heavier than applause. And then the noise came. First soft, then rolling. Applause rising like a tide, gathering power until people stood, clapping, some shouting, some weeping. For half a minute, the hall belonged to that single sentence. In homes across America, parents murmured to one another, "Did you hear that?" A group of college students in Wisconsin rewound their stream, shaking their heads. A trucker outside Tulsa muttered, "That's gonna stick." When the noise ebbed, Obama spoke again. Faith is not a costume you wear when it wins you points. It is the way you act when nobody's looking. It's how you treat those who can't give you anything back. That's why, when my character is questioned, I don't scream about it. I let my life speak. The moderator glanced at Trump, waiting for the counterstrike. Trump finally lifted his microphone, his voice louder than before, sharp like a blade trying to cut through fog. "Nice speech," he snapped. "You've always been good with words, Barack. Everybody knows that. But let's not pretend quoting one line makes you the moral compass of this country. It doesn't. We've seen your record. We know the truth. But the impact was muted now, like throwing stones into water that had already settled around a deeper truth. The verse lingered. The moment lingered. And somewhere between the cheers and the hush, the night had already been decided, not by the loudest voice, but by the one that spoke last without shouting. The crowd's reaction was a mix of claps and murmurs, but the moment didn't carry the thunder one might have expected. In one corner, a faint cheer rose from Trump's side, yet it was far from a resounding chorus. The cameras, ever watchful, zoomed in to capture an unexpected detail. A young woman seated just behind him shook her head subtly and leaned toward the person next to her, whispering something that carried a hint of disbelief. The contrast between the two figures on stage became almost cinematic. Barack Obama, sitting opposite, leaned back with an air of patience, his microphone resting loosely in his lap, his expression neither triumphant nor tense, just still, composed, almost unreadable. The room, however, seemed to exhale a collective understanding. The momentum had shifted, though no one had shouted, and no policy had been rattled off. The moderator, sensing both the tension and the significance, took a brief breath and addressed the room. Gentlemen, before we open the floor for questions from the audience, I think it's safe to say we've just witnessed a moment that will linger in conversations far beyond tonight. The crowd responded with another wave of applause, flashbulbs popping as photographers captured the stark image of two men, one radiating composure, the other visibly unsettled. But the stakes stretched beyond the confines of that hall in Phoenix. The true measure of this exchange would not be the sound of clapping in the room, but the reverberation it would send across living rooms, phone screens, and newsrooms within hours, reshaping the memory of this night for millions. Every twitch of Trump's expression was caught by the cameras. His trademark smirk faltered. His sharp remarks seemed to hang heavy in the air. His dominant energy flickered for a moment. The words Obama had offered were not loud, not an attack, not even a defense laden with statistics or policy achievements. They were simple, rooted in scripture, and that simplicity cut deeper than the loudest rebuttal. Yet, Trump was not one to let silence become his adversary. His posture straightened. His hand gripped the microphone tighter, and he leaned forward with a voice that now carried an edge, part defiance, part performance. Let me tell you something, folks, he began, his eyes scanning the crowd as if to rally a deal on the brink. Quoting a single line from the Bible? That doesn't prove a thing. Anyone can pull a verse out. I can do that. You can do that. That doesn't mean you've lived it. And we all know, Barack, you haven't lived it. That's the truth. There were cheers from his supporters, but they were scattered, thinner than before. The applause lacked its earlier uniformity. It sounded more like a routine than a roar. The camera swept across the audience, finding faces with folded arms, furrowed brows, and others whose gaze drifted toward Obama, as if still digesting the weight of his words. Trump pressed harder, sensing the ground under him felt less firm. I've been saying this for years, he continued. This man talks like a preacher, but look at the results. Churches struggling, families struggling, borders wide open, jobs gone. If that's what being guided by the Bible looks like, maybe he's been reading the wrong one. A pocket of laughter erupted from his side, but even that laughter felt forced, almost defensive. Obama didn't flinch. He kept his hands loosely clasped, his eyes steady, not smug, but studying, as though observing a student trying too hard to win an argument without understanding the lesson. The moderator interjected to recalibrate the flow. President Trump, are you suggesting that scripture has no place in this conversation? Because earlier, you questioned President Obama's faith directly. Trump scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Of course, scripture has a place. I respect the Bible more than anybody. Everybody knows that. I've held it. I've read it. I've quoted it many times. But this guy, he jabbed his finger toward Obama. He uses it like a shield. And it's fake. Totally fake. A ripple of gasps swept the hall, louder this time. To call another man's faith fraudulent on national television was not only provocative but risky. Obama finally raised his microphone, his voice calm, threading through the unsettled noise. Mr. President, you can call me many things, but fake isn't one of them. The people of this nation know me. They've watched my life for decades. They've seen my flaws. They've seen my family. They've seen my faith in action. And here's the truth. I don't need to prove it to you. They've already seen it for themselves. The crowd erupted, a mix of standing ovations and hands clapping so hard they flushed red. Trump's jaw tensed, and he cut in sharply. "Oh, give me a break. You left this country divided, weaker, and everybody knows it. You can't just sit there quoting verses and acting like you're the moral high ground. You're not." Obama didn't raise his tone. He let the applause fade, then leaned forward, voice firm but still even. Division doesn't begin with disagreement. It begins when leaders decide to pit neighbor against neighbor, when they twist faith into a weapon instead of a guide. I've never claimed perfection, but I've also never stood on a stage like this and questioned another man's soul. That's a line I won't cross. The response landed like a quiet thunderclap. Applause rippled again, louder, fuller, with even some who had cheered Trump earlier now leaning back, struck by the contrast. The moderator, voice low but unrelenting, turned to Trump. "Mr. President, would you like to respond?" Trump exhaled sharply. "You know what? I don't need to respond. The American people know the truth. They know what I've done for them. They know I've delivered more than anyone else in history. And quoting a verse doesn't change that." The line was meant to land like a hammer, but instead it fell thin, defensive. Cameras zoomed in on his cheeks, a faint flush visible under the lights, his hand gripping the microphone a little too tightly. Obama leaned back again, shoulders softening, a faint, restrained smile tugging at his lips, not smug, but certain. He didn't gloat. He didn't press further. He just let the moment breathe. The moderator cleared his throat. "We'll now move to questions from the audience," he said, though the hall was still charged with the aftershock of what had just happened. As the program shifted, applause rose once more, and the cameras panned across faces, some cheering, some pensive, some visibly unsettled by the exchange. Across the nation, phones buzzed, TVs replayed, social feeds erupted. Within minutes, the clip was circulating, Obama's single verse spreading far faster than Trump's rebuttal ever could. By the time the town hall wrapped, the story was already snowballing. Reporters were hunched over laptops, typing furiously as camera crews scrambled to collect reactions. Anchors whispered instructions. "Loop that moment, lead with it." Headlines formed before the candidates even left the stage. CNN's Chiron read, "Obama counters with scripture." Crowd reacts. Fox News framed it differently. "Trump challenges Obama on morals, heated exchange in Phoenix." MSNBC played the sequence nearly uncut, panelists marveling at how a few quiet words had turned the entire room. Social media became an inferno. On Twitter, hashtags trended. #IntegrityShown, #Obamaverse, #TownHall 2025. Posts plastered the verse in bold text, over images of Obama's steady gaze. On Facebook, live streams replayed the clip, comments flying by the second. One viewer from Oklahoma wrote, "That hit me harder than anything I've heard in years. Say what you want about Obama, but that felt real." Another pushback. "Trump's right. A verse isn't proof. Actions matter." Cable shows rushed to dissect every syllable. In a Dallas studio, a conservative pundit argued, "Obama's a performer. He knows timing. He knows silence. And tonight he used both to rattle Trump." But don't forget, Trump's message was about results, not words. A liberal analyst across the table shook his head. No, this wasn't performance. It was presence versus provocation. Obama didn't need to shout. He let the verse carry the weight. Comedians pounced as well. One late-night host quipped, "Trump came ready for a fight. Obama handed him Sunday school." Another joked, "Who knew Proverbs could trend harder than a pop album?" But the voices that mattered most weren't on television. They were in the corners of everyday America. In a bar in Des Moines, Iowa, farmers replayed the clip on a cracked phone screen. One older man, hands rough from years in the fields, muttered, "I didn't vote for him back then, but that was the truth. You can't fake calm like that." Across the table, a younger man disagreed. "Nah, words don't change anything. Action does." In Fresno, a retired nurse called her daughter, voice trembling, "That verse reminded me of your grandfather. He always said integrity was everything. I haven't heard a leader talk like that in years." In Birmingham, college students split a pizza and dissected it between bites. One leaned back and said, "For me, it wasn't about politics. It was about character. The way he said it like he actually believed it. That sticks. Even in Trump's strongholds. Some admitted the moment landed. A trucker in Amarillo texted a friend. Not an Obama fan. But damn. That verse hit. By dawn, newspapers coast to coast ran variations of the same theme. Obama's scripture shifts tone of town hall, Arizona Republic. Clash over morals in Phoenix, USA Today. A verse. A pause. A president left searching for words, New York Times. Talk radio played the clip for hours. Callers lit up lines. Some hailed Obama's calm as real leadership. Others dismissed it as scripted theater. But no one could deny it had struck a chord. On TikTok, teens stitched the clip with reactions. On Instagram, it was set to music and reshared thousands of times. Pastors preached about it. Podcasters debated it. Pollsters measured it. Overnight flash polls revealed a notable bump in Obama's favorability among undecided voters. Many cited calmness and moral conviction as their reason. Trump's core base stood firm, but cracks in the broader audience appeared. The verse had become shorthand. Did you hear what Obama said? Popped up in workplaces, classrooms, churches, coffee shops. It wasn't just political, it was cultural. And beneath the headlines, it became personal. In Dallas, a single mother named Marlene, just off her night shift, watched the clip on her phone, hair tied messily, exhaustion etched on her face. As the words echoed, the integrity of the upright guides them, she looked down the hallway where her children slept. That's what I want them to learn, she whispered. Tears swelled, not because of politics, not because of partisanship, but because, for a fleeting moment, words carried weight again. Years earlier, she had made a quiet vow, one she never imagined would echo back to her in a moment like this, to raise her children with unwavering honesty, even when the world around them made it feel impossible. That night, far away in Dayton, Ohio, a retired Marine named Clifford sat in his well-worn recliner, watching the broadcast with a remote resting in his hand. For 22 years, he had served his country, carrying the weight of discipline and loyalty deep in his bones. Patriotism was his language, but flattery and empty speeches had never moved him. Yet as he leaned back and heard those words spoken, something shifted. That's it, he murmured, almost to himself. That's what we've been missing. His young grandson, crouched on the carpet with a video game controller in his hands, looked up with curiosity. Missing what, Grandpa? Clifford pointed toward the television and said with a steady tone, integrity, son. Without that, all the strength, wealth, and power in the world are nothing but smoke. The boy nodded, not fully grasping the weight of that moment, but the phrase etched itself in his mind, like a seed waiting for its season to bloom. Hundreds of miles south, in a dorm lounge in New Orleans, a handful of college students replayed the same clip on a flickering laptop screen. They were not the type to spend their nights in Bible study, and some had never set foot in a church, yet something in that verse caught their attention. Aisha, a young woman with an old soul, leaned forward and whispered, "You don't have to believe in scripture to feel that. That's not about religion. It's about the kind of life you choose to live." Her roommate nodded and added, "Isn't it wild how one sentence can silence a whole room?" For them, it wasn't about partisanship or campaign points. It was about being reminded of something their generation often felt was missing in leadership: sincerity. From barbershops in Detroit buzzing with early morning conversation to quiet church basements in Kansas where parishioners debated whether the moment had been genuine or rehearsed, the ripple continued. A barber recited the words while the clippers hummed. A grandmother in Topeka said, "Maybe it was planned, maybe not, but truth doesn't lose its power just because a politician says it." Pastors and priests found themselves unexpectedly drawn into the conversation. In Tulsa, Pastor Raymond Lewis posted a video saying, "Scripture is a double-edged sword, and last night, this country felt its edge." The post gathered tens of thousands of views in hours. In Charleston, Reverend Gloria McIntyre told her congregation, "Don't obsess over who said it. Ask yourself if you're living it." Across pews filled with restless teens and weary elders, heads nodded in agreement. Even in unlikely places, the words traveled. At a diner on the outskirts of Boise, two truck drivers sat over plates of bacon and eggs. One grunted, "I still don't like the man," but quoting Proverbs in front of Trump. That took nerve. The other smirked, and it hit the mark. They went back to talking about fuel prices and weather, But the verse hung in the air like steam from their coffee. Of course, not everyone welcomed it. On conservative blogs and call-in radio, accusations of manipulation echoed. He knew exactly what he was doing. One host growled. That was a political bullet wrapped in scripture. But even the loudest critics admitted, however grudgingly, that the moment had struck a chord. For families gathered quietly in their homes, the night became less about policy and more about parenting. In Omaha, a father repeated the line to his teenage daughters over dinner. Integrity guides the upright, he explained. That means doing what's right when no one's looking. His youngest asked, like when I don't cheat on a test even if no one would catch me? He smiled. Exactly. That's worth more than any grade. What began as another night of political theater in Phoenix had turned into something different. A spark that reignited old lessons in some, stirred faith in others, and reminded many that real leadership is measured less by volume and more by character. Commentators dissected the moment until their words grew stale. But ordinary people carried it in simpler ways. Teachers wrote the verse on whiteboards in classrooms from Flagstaff to Philadelphia. A retired educator in Spokane told her friend, forget politics. One man led with ego, the other with principle. That's the whole story. The contrast was undeniable. One candidate came swinging like a brawler, fists high, words sharp as glass. The other stood still, firm yet unprovocative, leaning on wisdom older than the nation itself. That night, America saw a rare thing, restraint as a form of strength. A grandmother in Kansas City told her granddaughter, your grandfather was like that, quiet, steady. He never shouted, but when he spoke, people leaned in because they knew he meant it. A factory worker in Bakersfield put it more bluntly. Trump swung hard. Obama didn't swing back, and that hit harder than any punch. The moral people took from that town hall wasn't handed to them by analysts or pundits. It emerged naturally, in break rooms, over cups of coffee, between text messages and morning commutes. It was the kind of moment that reminded a divided country of its shared hunger for something old and simple, integrity. Obama, for his part, didn't boast about it afterward. In a quiet interview, he shrugged off the attention. It's a verse I've carried with me for years, he said. Quoting it doesn't make me better than anyone. It just helps remind us of what matters. His tone was the same as it had been on stage, measured, unforced. Trump, meanwhile, mocked the moment days later at a rally, turning scripture into a punchline. His crowd roared, but outside those walls, the comparison only deepened. Weeks passed, and yet the verse refused to fade. It showed up in Sunday sermons, in factory lunchrooms, in late-night kitchen talks. A father wrote to a Phoenix newspaper, I paused the TV that night and spoke with my son about integrity. I don't know who I'll vote for next year, but I know that talk mattered more than the election. Another reader admitted, I was ready to tune out, sick of the shouting. But that verse made me put my phone down. I haven't done that in years. What lingered was not just the words themselves, but the way they were carried, with calmness in a noisy era, with patience in a culture addicted to outrage. Leadership, the moment suggested, isn't about shouting opponents down or chasing applause. It's about remembering that your influence outlives the lights of the stage. Power built on noise crumbles. Power built on principle endures. And so, the real challenge was left not for the candidates, but for the country. Would people carry that reminder forward, or let it dissolve like so many other viral clips? The town hall will fade from headlines, as all spectacles do. But the question it left behind is timeless. When the world tests your patience, when your values are pushed against the wall, what guides you? Your temper or your integrity? For parents raising children, for workers facing hard choices, for students navigating peer pressure, for anyone standing at a crossroad of pride and principle, that night in Phoenix whispered an answer without shouting it. Real strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it forgives. Sometimes it holds steady while the world demands a swing. Character outlasts applause. Humility outshines noise. Integrity, quiet, steady, inconvenient at times, is the kind of power that endures long after the lights go dark.